They cast Mara Redwillow beyond the last fence at sundown. In Redwillow, that was worse than a sentence. It meant a person no longer belonged to the town, the church bell, the wells, or the mercy of ordinary folks. The last fence stood 3 miles west of the church, where the grass thinned into dust and the land opened hard beneath the evening sun. People said nothing kind waited beyond it. No shade, no water, no road worth trusting. Mara walked toward it with a small canvas sack in one hand and a dull knife tied at her waist. Dust clung to her dress. The blue stone at her throat caught the last light, like a secret refusing to die. Silas Crow stood near the road with his thumbs hooked in his vest. "She brought bad luck," he said. "First the feed store burns. Then cattle go missing. How much more does Redwillow lose before we admit what she is?" No one answered. That silence hurt worse than a shout. Mara looked from face to face and saw people who had once taken herbs from her hands, people whose children she had helped through fever, people who had nodded to her in the market when no one else was watching. Now they looked at the dust. A boy no older than 10 slipped from behind his mother and held out a tin canteen. It trembled in his small hand. For one breath, the whole town seemed balanced on the courage of that child. Then his mother pulled him back. The canteen fell open. Water spilled into the dirt and vanished. Mara did not reach for it. She did not beg. She only watched the wet patch disappear. "Go on," Silas said. "Wilderness is waiting." So Mara stepped past the last fence. The gate closed behind her with a soft wooden groan. Not locked, not barred, just shut, the way people shut their hearts and pretend it is nothing. Night came slow and cold. The wind carried sage, cattle dust, and the dry smell of stone that had held heat all day. Mara kept walking until Redwillow became only a scatter of yellow lanterns behind her. Her mouth dried. Her legs trembled. Still she walked. Stopping meant remembering. Near midnight, beneath a thin white moon, she heard a weak sound from a wash below the trail. Not a wolf. Not a man. A young horse was trapped in the arroyo, one foreleg caught beneath a fallen rail. Mara stood swaying at the edge of the wash. She had one strip of cloth left in her sack, meant for herself if the cold turned mean. She used it on the horse. She knelt in the sand and worked the rail loose inch by inch. Her hands shook. Her breath scraped in her chest. Still she whispered to the animal until it stopped fighting. When the horse finally pulled free, it leaned against her shoulder like it had known her all its life. Mara gave a tired little laugh. "You picked the wrong woman to find," she whispered. Then her knees gave out. She sank beside the young horse, one hand still resting on its neck. High above the wash, Elias Whittaker drew his black horse to a halt. He was the richest cowboy in the territory, owner of Whittaker Range and more land than Redwillow could count. But wealth had not made his house warm, and it had not taught him to sleep easy. He had been riding alone when he saw the shape below. First, the horse. Then, the woman. Then, the tracks around her, one set dragging, one set stumbling. Elias sat still beneath the stars. He knew what Redwillow did to people it feared. He knew the last fence. He knew what it meant to find someone beyond it. For a long moment, only the wind moved. Then he touched his heels to the horse and rode down toward her. Elias reached Mara before the cold settled all the way into her bones. He did not call out at first. A frightened horse could hurt itself trying to rise, and a frightened woman left beyond the last fence had every right to distrust a stranger in the dark. He swung down slowly, one hand visible, the other holding a canteen by its strap. The young horse lifted its head and gave a weak breath. Mara stirred beside it. Her eyes opened before the rest of her body could obey. "Stay back," she whispered. Elias stopped 10 feet away. He had heard men in town speak of her as if she were bad luck given human shape. But there in the wash, with dust on her lashes and both hands scraped from freeing an animal that could not thank her, she looked like the only honest thing Redwillow had left behind. He set the canteen on the ground and nudged it forward with his boot. "Water," he said. Mara stared at it. "I do not need pity." Elias looked at the exhausted horse, then back at her. "Good. I do not carry any." Something in that answer held her still. It was not soft. It did not ask to be praised. It was plain, like a fence post driven deep. Mara reached for the canteen, but her hand shook. Elias stepped forward only when she failed the second time. He crouched, opened the cap, and held it where she could take it herself. That mattered. She drank once, barely enough to wet her mouth. then turned the canteen toward the horse. Elias watched her give Mercy away while she herself was nearly empty. The moon caught the blue stone at her throat. Elias saw it and went still. Not frightened, not startled enough to speak. Just still, as if an old door had opened inside him. "Where did you get that?" he asked. Mara's fingers closed over the stone. "It is mine. I did not ask who owned it." Her eyes narrowed. Even half-conscious, she knew the difference between curiosity and claim. "My mother left it to me." Elias looked away, toward the ridge. The same blue stone had once hung at his sister Abigail's throat in a portrait turned face down above his hearth. Same silver twist. Same crack through the middle like a frozen tear. He told himself there were many stones in the world. Then Mara shifted, and a burned scrap of paper slipped from a hidden fold behind the cord. It fluttered into the sand. Elias picked it up before the wind took it. The paper was black along one edge. Only a few letters remained clear beneath the moon. Whittaker. His own name looked back at him from a stranger's keepsake. Mara saw his face and reached for it. "Give it back." Elias handed it over at once. No argument. No demand. That, too, she noticed. For a moment, they listened to the wind move through the wash. Behind them, Redwillow slept behind warm windows and locked doors. Ahead lay 12 miles of cold trail to Whittaker Range, if the dry creek held firm and the young horse did not stumble. Elias untied a blanket from his saddle. "Can you ride?" Mara tried to stand. Pride got her halfway. Pain and thirst took the rest. Elias did not touch her until she gave the smallest nod. Then he wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and helped her up with the care of a man lifting something already broken by other hands. She sat before him on the saddle, stiff as a fence rail. One hand stayed on the blue stone. The other rested near the dull knife at her waist. Elias noticed and said nothing. He mounted behind her with enough distance to show respect. The young horse followed on a lead, limping but alive. As they climbed from the wash, Mara looked once toward the ridge behind them. "They will come for me," she said. Elias kept his eyes on the trail. "Then they will have to ride farther than the last fence." The words were not loud. They did not need to be. In that cold hour before dawn, with the Whittaker name folded inside a burned scrap against Mara's heart, something shifted. Redwillow had tried to bury her in silence. Elias Whittaker had found what the town left behind, and he was taking it home. Whittaker Range rose out of the gray morning like a kingdom built from cedar, stone, and hard money. Long barns stood red against pale grass. Windmills turned over deep wells. Fences ran so far they looked less like borders and more like a man trying to hold back the world. Yet the main house sat quiet on its rise, broad and white, with dark windows and no sound of family inside. A place could be rich and still feel empty. Mara felt that emptiness before Elias helped her down. 2 ranch hands came from the stable, then stopped when they saw her wrapped in his blanket and the young horse limping behind them. "Fresh water," Elias said. "Oats for the colt. Send Mrs. Bell for clean bandages." The older hand, Jonah Pike, looked once at Mara and swallowed whatever words had climbed into his mouth. "Yes, sir." Inside the house, the air smelled of wood smoke, coffee, and old lavender. Elias led Mara to a chair beside the hearth, then stepped back as if the space around her belonged to her alone. That unsettled her more than crowding would have. Men who wanted power always reached. Elias did not. He placed her dull knife on the small table beside her, handle turned toward her hand. "You dropped this in the wash," he said. Mara looked at the knife, then at him. In Redwillow, they had taken her name and twisted it into blame. Here, this man gave back a blade and trusted her not to use it wrongly. "You are not afraid?" she asked. Elias removed his hat and set it on the mantel. Of a woman who spent her last strength saving a horse. He shook his head. No, before Mara could answer. Her eyes found a picture frame lying face down beside the clock. Dust had gathered along its edge, except where a man's hand had touched it often. Elias followed her gaze, and the quiet in the room changed. He did not turn the frame over. Not yet. Mrs. Bell arrived with bandages and the careful expression of a woman old enough to keep her judgments buried until they proved useful. She cleaned Mara's scraped hands without asking questions. Through the window, the young horse stood under Jonah's care, Mara's torn cloth still tied around its leg. Mrs. Bell saw it. "You did that." Mara nodded once. The housekeeper worked more gently after that. Then hooves sounded in the yard. Not one rider. Many. Jonah crossed the yard at a near run. "Mr. Whittaker," he called. "Town riders coming up the south road." Elias did not reach for the gun belt hanging by the door. He only rolled down his sleeves and buttoned his cuffs. Mara stood too fast. The room tilted. "I will leave," she said. "They came because of me." Elias turned. "Sit down." The words were firm, but not cruel. She did not sit. "You do not know what they will say. I know what men say when they come in a crowd." He walked to the window. 20 riders gathered at the closed gate, with Silas Crow in front on a polished bay horse. Behind him stood shopkeepers, teamsters, church elders, and men who had watched a canteen spill into dust the night before. Silas lifted his voice. "Whittaker, we know she is in there." Mara's hand closed around the blue stone. Elias opened the front door and stepped onto the porch without haste. "This is town business," Silas said. "Hand her over, and we will keep it peaceful." Elias rested one hand against the porch post. "She is under my roof." A murmur moved through the riders. Silas leaned forward. "What is she to you?" Mara felt cold all over. There it was. The question every room eventually asked. The question that decided whether a person belonged or could be swept away like ash. She stood in the doorway behind Elias, waiting for denial, excuse, or careful distance. Elias did not look back. He looked straight at Silas and answered in a voice so calm it made the yard go still. "Mine to protect." The words crossed the space between porch and gate like thunder heard from far away. Silas's smile weakened. Then his eyes shifted past Elias, found Mara in the doorway, and dropped to the blue stone at her throat. For one breath, the richest liar in Red Hollow looked afraid. Silas recovered quickly, the way men like him always did when fear showed too plainly. He sat taller in the saddle and let his smile return with a thinner edge. "Yours to protect," he said. "That is a mighty expensive sentence, Whittaker." Elias stood on the porch without his hat, without his gun, without any of the ornaments men used when they wanted to look dangerous. He only had his quiet, and that had always served him better. "Say what you came to say," Elias told him. Silas spread one hand toward the ranch. "Red Hollow has done business with Whittaker Range for 15 years. Your beef moves through our rail office. Your grain orders pass through our storehouses. Your men drink in our saloon, buy from our merchants, worship in our church. Keep that woman here, and every door in town closes to you." A few riders looked proud. A few looked ashamed. Most watched Elias to see whether money could still be frightened by public opinion. Mara stood in the doorway with Mrs. Bell just behind her. "You blame me for fire," Mara called out, her voice rough but steady. "You blame me for sick cattle. You blame me for rain that did not fall and wells you never dug deep enough." Some riders frowned. Hearing her speak clearly troubled the story they had brought with them. Silas's jaw tightened. "No one asked you to talk." Elias looked at him. Nothing more. Silas went quiet for half a breath. Then Mara stepped forward into the morning light. The blue stone rested at her throat. Silas saw it again. His fingers curled around his reins. Elias saw that too. "That stone bothers you," Elias said. The yard changed, not with sound, but with attention. Silas laughed once. "A trinket does not bother me. Then you will not mind looking at it." Elias turned toward Mara, his voice softer. "May I?" Mara studied him. Last night, she would have refused any man who asked to touch what her mother had left behind. But Elias had returned her knife. He had not crowded her. He had not called her safe and then made himself her cage. She lifted the cord from her neck and placed it in his open palm. Elias held it flat for all to see. The blue stone glinted, silver wire twisted around its edge, a thin crack running through the center like lightning under glass. An older church elder near the gate leaned forward. "I have seen that before." Silas turned sharply. "No, you have not." Elias looked from the elder to Silas. Another small piece settled into place. "My sister wore one like it," Elias said. "Abigail Whittaker disappeared in a winter storm 11 years ago. Came home 3 days later with fever in her lungs and a blue stone at her throat. She said a woman from the western camps saved her when every road was buried under snow." Silas's smile vanished. Old grief makes men see patterns. Elias turned the stone carefully. Behind it, tucked inside a hidden fold, rested the burned scrap Mara had guarded all her life. "Maybe," he said, "but grief does not write my family name on paper and hide it inside a keepsake." A murmur moved through the gate. Mara reached for the stone, and Elias returned it at once. She tucked it against her chest, as if the whole town had come too close. Silas lifted his voice. She is using your dead sister's memory to make a fool of you. Mara flinched, not from fear, but from the insult landing where something sacred lived. Elias stepped down one porch stair. Careful. Silas's face colored. Or what? You will buy the truth too. Elias took another step. Truth is cheaper than lies. It does not need so many men to carry it. Several riders looked away from Silas. That was when he changed tactics. If she means so much to you, Whittaker, then say it plain. Tell Redwillow what she is. Mara's breath caught. The old trap, dressed in new clothes. If Elias called her a guest, they would say she could be removed. If he called her a servant, they would laugh. If he called her nothing, they would take her silence as permission. Elias looked back at her, not to measure her worth, but to make sure she was still standing. She was. Barely. He faced Silas again. No one at that gate will decide what she is. Not you. Not me. Not any town that mistakes a crowd for a conscience. Silas had not won, so he reached for shame. Then keep her. But when Redwillow turns its back on you, do not come asking us to trade with a man bewitched by a cast-off. Elias did not answer. Mara did. She stepped onto the porch beside him, pale with exhaustion, proud as sunrise over hard country. I was cast out, she said. That does not make me cast off. For a moment, no one breathed. Then, from the stable, the young horse gave a soft call. Every eye turned toward the animal Mara had saved. It stood shaky but alive, her torn cloth still tied gently around its leg. That small mercy did what argument could not. It made the accusation look smaller. Silas saw doubt move from face to face. His gaze dropped once more to the blue stone, and Elias knew fear had not been a mistake. Silas knew something about that keepsake. Something he needed buried deeper than Mara had been. Without another word, Silas pulled his horse around. This is not finished. Elias watched him ride toward the south road, the others following slower than they had arrived. When the dust settled, Mara reached for the porch rail. Elias did not touch her, but he stood close enough that if she fell, the ground would not get her first. She looked after Silas. He knows my mother's stone, she whispered. Elias's eyes stayed on the road. Yes, he said, and now we know he is afraid of it. The house felt different after the riders left, as if their dust had settled on every quiet thing. Mara sat near the hearth with the blue stone in her palm. Elias stood by the mantel, staring at the picture frame lying face down beside the clock. Between them lay a silence too old to belong to either one alone. Mrs. Bell brought coffee, bread, and warm broth, then left without a word. At the door, she paused long enough to look at Mara with something gentler than pity. Mara noticed. A house that did not ask her to disappear. A man who returned her knife. A woman who set food down without making kindness feel like a chain. Elias finally lifted the frame. Dust marked his thumb as he turned it over. The young woman in the photograph had Abigail Whittaker's eyes, clear and stubborn, with a faint smile that looked earned in private. Around her neck hung a blue stone almost exactly like Mara's. Same silver wire. Same crack through the center. Mara leaned forward. She was your sister. Elias nodded. Younger by 6 years. Braver by more than that. His voice roughened. She rode out during a snowstorm because a ranch hand's child had fever. Her horse came back without her. We found her 3 days later wrapped in a blanket that was not ours, carrying that stone. Mara looked down at her own necklace. For the first time in her life, the thing her mother left behind felt less like a memory and more like a door. My mother never told me where it came from, she said. Only that it belonged to a kindness that must not be forgotten. Elias went to the writing desk and opened the bottom drawer. Inside were old letters tied with black ribbon, a pressed wildflower, and a small leather journal. He brought the journal to the table and opened it to a page marked by blue thread. Abigail's handwriting moved across the paper in careful faded lines. Elias let Mara read for herself. She knew enough English to follow slowly. Saved by a woman from the western camp. Pale hands. Quiet voice. A child wrapped at her side. Blue stone given so I would remember. If the stone ever returns, protect the one who carries it. Mara's breath caught. A child wrapped at her side. She touched the page with 2 fingers, afraid the truth might crumble. That was me, she whispered. Elias looked at her, and the distance between them changed again. He had rescued a woman from the wilderness. But the past had been waiting there before him. Mara's mother had saved Abigail Whittaker in a winter storm. Abigail had carried that debt home. Elias had spent 11 years not knowing the debt had a name. Mara closed the journal carefully. Why would Silas fear this? Elias took the burned scrap from beside the stone. In daylight, more could be seen. The edge was blackened, but beneath the soot were lines from an old agreement. Whittaker was clear. So was another name near the bottom. Silas Crow. Elias held it near the window. This is not a letter, he said. It is a deed witness page. Mara frowned. For land. For water. The word entered the room like a low bell. Elias crossed to the wall map and pointed west of Red Hollow, beyond the last fence, where dry country folded into shallow ridges. That land is worthless unless a man knows where the underground spring runs. Mara stood slowly, the blue stone hanging from her hand. My mother knew. Elias nodded. And Abigail may have known after the storm. Outside, the young horse called from the stable. Mara looked toward the window and remembered the night the feed store burned. She remembered a sharp smell of lamp oil. She remembered Silas Crow leaving the alley with one sleeve held close to his side. At the time, she had thought fear made shapes out of shadows. Now the shadows had a name. He burned it, she said. Elias turned from the map. Mara's face had gone pale, but her eyes were steady. I saw him leave the store before the flames rose. He told everyone I was near the back road. I was, but I was carrying medicine to Mrs. Vale's boy. No one asked. They only listened to him. Elias folded the burned scrap with care and set it beside Abigail's journal. The room no longer felt empty. It felt crowded with the dead, the lied to, the silent, and the waiting. Then Jonah Pike burst through the front door, hat in hand, breathing hard. Mr. Whittaker. Smoke at the north barn. Elias moved to the window. A thin black line climbed into the bright noon sky. Mara's hand closed around her necklace. She already knew what the town would say before the first rider came. Elias knew it, too. This fire was not meant to destroy a barn. It was meant to finish a story Silas had started. The north barn did not burn down. That was the first thing Silas Crow had not counted on. Whittaker men moved fast, carrying buckets from the well and dragging wet blankets across the hay doors. By the time town riders appeared on the south road, the flames had been pressed into a black wet scar along the outer wall. The horses were safe. The hay was damp, but standing. Only one thing had been left too carefully near the side door, where every arriving I would find it. A torn strip of cloth from Mara's dress. Jonah Pike picked it up with 2 fingers and looked toward the house. Mara saw it from the yard, where she had come despite Mrs. Bell telling her to rest. The cloth moved in the wind like a small flag raised for a lie. She did not speak. She had known the shape of this moment before it arrived. Silas rode in at the head of the crowd, dust on his coat, concern painted across his face. Behind him came Sheriff Daniel Kersey, 2 merchants, 3 ranchers, and more townspeople than had stood at the gate that morning. Fear had multiplied while traveling. It always did. Another fire, Silas called. And look there. A piece of her dress right where the trouble started. Sheriff Kersey looked at the cloth, then at Mara, then at Elias. He was not a cruel man. That made him harder to hate and easier for Silas to use. Mr. Whittaker, he said slowly, this has gone far enough. Elias took the cloth from Jonah and held it up. You think a woman trying to hide guilt would leave this where a blind mule could find it? No one answered. Silas gave a soft laugh. Panic makes people careless. Mara stepped forward. She was pale from the long night and tired from being accused twice by the same mouths, but her voice stayed level. I was inside the house when smoke rose. Silas tilted his head, with only Whittaker people to say so. Mrs. Bell came down the porch steps. I say so. Silas barely looked at her. A loyal housekeeper is not proof. No, Mrs. Bell said. But a liar sweating through his collar before noon is not proof either. A few men glanced at Silas's neck. He stiffened. The ground was shifting by inches. Silas turned toward the sheriff. Search her things. Mara's hand moved to the blue stone. Elias stepped between them. No, Sheriff Kersey sighed. Elias. No. Elias repeated. You will not make a public show out of a woman because Silas Crow keeps finding convenient evidence. Silas's eyes flashed. Convenient? The feed store burned, and she was there. Your barn burns, and her cloth is there. How many signs do you need? Elias looked at him, then held up the burned scrap from the blue stone. Maybe one more. Silas went still. Elias unfolded the paper carefully. This was hidden in a keepsake Mara's mother left her. It carries my family name and yours. It concerns land west of the last fence. The sheriff frowned. What land? Waterland, Elias said. The word passed through the townspeople like wind through dry grass. Red Hollow understood water better than sermons. Silas forced a smile. Old paper. Burned paper. Nothing a court would honor. Maybe not, Elias said. But Abigail Whittaker's journal might honor it enough to bring questions. And questions are all honest men should need before dragging someone into judgment. Sheriff Kersey looked down. Shame crossed his face, not strong enough yet, but visible. Mara watched it with tired eyes. She had learned not to trust shame until it became action. Silas saw the sheriff waver and reached for spectacle. Fine, he said. Let her speak in town. Let every person in Red Hollow hear this tale of magic stones, dead sisters, and secret water. If Whittaker believes her so completely, let him stand beside her in front of God and everybody. Then he smiled. Or better yet, marry the curse and be done pretending this is charity. The yard fell silent. Silas had taken protection and twisted it toward ownership, hoping Elias would step back from the ugliness of it. Elias did not move. He only looked at Mara. You owe them nothing, he said quietly. It was the first thing spoken that day meant only for her. Mara could have walked away. Elias made that plain in the way he left space between them, in the way his hands stayed at his sides, in the way his voice carried no command. She thought of spilled water disappearing into dust. She thought of her mother's stone. She thought of Abigail Whittaker writing a promise before fever took her. Then Mara lifted her chin. I will speak, she said. Not because they deserve my answer. Because I deserve my name. Elias nodded once. The sheriff removed his hat. Mrs. Bell's eyes shone, though her mouth stayed firm. Silas's smile thinned. He had wanted fear. He had wanted shame. Instead, under a sky still marked by smoke, he had given Mara a road back into Red Hollow with the richest cowboy in the territory walking beside her and the truth folded in his coat pocket. They rode into Red Hollow in the late afternoon, when the sun threw every shadow long and guilty across the street. Mara sat straight in the saddle Elias had chosen for her, the blue stone resting at her throat. Elias rode beside her, not ahead, not behind. That was the first thing the town noticed. The second was that he wore no gun on his hip. Men on the boardwalk frowned. Women paused in doorways. Children stopped rolling hoops in the dust. Word moved faster than hoofbeats. By the time Mara and Elias reached the church square, Red Hollow had gathered like a storm that did not know whether to break or pass over. Sheriff Kersey stood near the steps, hat in both hands. Silas Crow waited beside him in a black coat too fine for the heat, smiling as if the town were a table and every soul there was a card already counted. The church bell did not ring. It only hung above them, bronze and silent. Mara dismounted without help. Elias offered his hand, but he did not insist when she stepped down on her own. A few people saw that and shifted uneasily. They had expected weakness. Mara gave them neither. Silas lifted his voice. Well now, Red Hollow has given this woman the chance to speak. Let us hear how a burned store, a burned barn, and a trail of misfortune are all misunderstandings. Mara looked at him, then at the crowd. She did not begin with fire. She began with water. My mother knew where the West Spring ran, she said. She showed kindness to Abigail Whittaker in a winter storm. Abigail left proof. Silas Crow knew that proof existed. Silas laughed, but it came too quick. A fine story. All it needs is a dime novel cover. Elias stepped forward and opened Abigail's journal. He read like a man paying a debt. Saved by a woman from the western camp. A child rapped at her side. Blue stone given so I would remember. If the stone ever returns, protect the one who carries it. The crowd listened, some with doubt, some with shame. Elias closed the journal. That child was Mara. The old church elder who had spoken at the ranch pushed to the front. His name was Amos Vale, and his hands trembled from age, not fear. I saw Abigail wear that stone, he said. After the storm, she came into church with snow still in her hair and said the Lord had sent help from the west. Silas turned on him. Old men remember what grief teaches them. Amos looked at Silas, and something tired but firm entered his face. Old men also remember handwriting. I kept accounts for your freight office before my eyes went poor. Elias unfolded the burned scrap. Sheriff Kersey took it this time. He held it carefully, then looked toward Amos. The old man leaned close. The square waited. That is Crow's hand, Amos said. The little hook on the S. He made it that way on every receipt. A murmur broke through the crowd. Silas's smile did not return. Mara felt the sound move around her. Not friendly yet. Not safe. But no longer one single wall. A wall with cracks could let light through. Sheriff Kersey looked at Silas. Why would your name be on a water deed tied to land beyond the last fence? Silas spread his hands. Business passes through many hands. Burned paper proves nothing. Mara stepped closer. The night the feed store burned, I saw you leave the alley by the lamp room. Your sleeves smelled of oil when you passed me. Silas's eyes sharpened. You expect them to take your word over mine? Mara looked around the square. Faces lowered. The question had weight because it had worked before. Then Mrs. Bell came from the edge of the crowd, holding something wrapped in cloth. Jonah Pike walked beside her with the young horse's lead rope in his hand. The animal stepped carefully, alive because Mara had saved it when no one was watching. Mrs. Bell unwrapped the bundle. Inside was a dark coat sleeve, cut clean from a garment. Found in your wash barrel behind the saloon, she said. Smelled of lamp oil even after soaking. Silas went pale in a way no dust could hide. Sheriff Kersey took the cloth. No one spoke for a while. The whole town seemed to hear its own silence from the night before. Silas looked from the sheriff to the crowd and saw, maybe for the first time, that fear no longer belonged to Mara alone. Elias turned to her in front of every person who had waited to see if he would step away. You owe them nothing more, he said. Mara looked at the church, the road, the faces, and the last light resting on the blue stone. I owe myself the ending, she answered. Mara stood in the center of Redwillow with the town gathered around her and the truth lying in pieces at her feet. A burned scrap, a dead woman's journal, an oil-stained sleeve, and a blue stone that had carried more honesty than 100 respectable mouths. The wind moved soft through the square, brushing wagon wheels and boots of men who had come expecting judgment to fall on someone else. Sheriff Kersey held Silas Crow's coat, sleeve in one hand, and the burned deed scrap in the other. His face had gone gray with the weight of what he had failed to see. Silas, he said, his voice older than it had been that morning, you will come with me. Silas looked at the sheriff as if the words belonged to some poorer man. You are making a mistake. No one answered for him. That was the first punishment. The crowd that had carried his lies now stood around him like fence posts gone cold. He turned to the merchants, the church elders, the ranchers who had repeated his stories over coffee and tobacco counters. Their eyes slipped away. A liar could live a long time on borrowed courage. It vanished quickly when nobody lent it anymore. Silas straightened his coat, though one sleeve no longer matched the secret it had kept. All of you needed someone to blame, he said. I only gave you a name. The words landed harder than denial would have. A woman near the front covered her mouth. Amos Vale lowered his head. The mother of the boy with the canteen began to cry without sound, not loudly enough to ask forgiveness. Only enough to show she had finally heard the water hit the dust again in her memory. Mara watched them all. She did not smile. She did not tremble. She had imagined this moment on colder nights, imagined the town forced to see what it had done. But when it came, it did not taste like victory. It tasted like ash after rain. Sheriff Kersey stepped toward Silas. There will be a hearing. The deed office will open its books. The water claim will be reviewed. Elias spoke then, calm as a closed gate. And the feed store ledgers. Every family who paid high prices after the fire deserves to know who profited from their hunger. Another murmur moved through the square, lower now, angrier, not wild but waking. Silas had not merely cast out a woman. He had used their fear to empty their pockets, dry their wells, and point their shame away from himself. Sheriff Kersey took Silas by the arm, not roughly, but firmly enough that the square understood the day had turned. Silas looked past him to Mara. For the first time, he spoke without performance. You think this makes you belong here? Mara met his eyes. No, she said. It proves I never needed your permission. The sheriff led him toward the jail, and not one person stepped aside with respect. They only moved because the law was finally walking in the right direction. When Silas passed the boy with the canteen, the child stared at the ground, ashamed of something that had never been his burden to carry. Mara saw him and softened before she meant to. Boy, she said. He looked up, frightened. Mara removed the small tin cup from Elias's saddle and held it out. "Next time," she said, "hold tighter to kindness." The boy nodded, tears bright in his eyes. His mother pressed a hand to his shoulder, then looked at Mara as if words were waiting behind her teeth, and none deserved to come out first. "I am sorry," she whispered. It was small, too small for what had happened. But it was real. Real things often began smaller than pride wanted. Mara gave one nod. Nothing more. Forgiveness was not a coin to be thrown into the street for everyone to see. Elias stepped beside her, close enough for the town to know he stood with her, far enough for Mara to stand on her own. Sheriff Kersey stopped at the jail door and turned back. "Mara Redwillow," he called, using her full name for the first time in that square. "What do you ask of this town?" The question opened the air. People leaned forward. Some expected punishment. Some feared it. Mara looked west, where beyond the rooftops the last fence waited under the sinking sun. She thought of her mother, of Abigail Whittaker, of a hidden spring running beneath land everyone had called useless until greed taught them otherwise. "Open the storehouses," she said. "Return what was taken from families who paid for his lie. Mark the West Spring as common water until the deed is settled fair. And at Sunday service, speak the truth from the church steps, not behind doors." The sheriff swallowed. "That is all." Mara looked at the crowd. No, silence tightened. She lifted the blue stone in her hand. "When someone is cast out again, ask why before you close the gate." No sermon could have struck deeper. The church bell moved once in the wind, a low bronze sound rolling over Red Hollow. This time, it did not feel like judgment waiting. It felt like the town hearing itself wake. The next morning, Red Hollow opened its storehouses before the church bell finished ringing. Men who had once stood silent at the last fence carried flour, beans, coffee, and cornmeal into the square and stacked them on long tables beneath the same sun that had watched Mara walk into the wilderness. No one called it charity, not after what Silas Crow had taken. Families came quietly, hats in hand, baskets on their arms, eyes lowered not from hunger this time, but from the hard work of facing one another without the shelter of a lie. Sheriff Kersey read the statement from the church steps just after 9 o'clock. His voice shook once, then steadied. He named the false fire. He named the hidden water claim. He named Mara Redwillow, not as a warning, not as an accusation, but as the woman wronged by both a man's greed and a town's willing blindness. When her name crossed the square, no one spoke over it. That was something. Not enough, but something. Mara stood at the edge of the crowd beside the young horse she had saved. Its head rested near her shoulder as if it had chosen her out of all the people there. Elias stood a few feet away, watching the town learn the slow manners of shame. He had offered to take Mara back to Whittaker Range before the statement was read. She had said no. A name cleared in private still lived under dust. She wanted hers spoken where it had been stained. When the sheriff finished, the mother of the boy with the canteen stepped forward, holding a fresh canteen in both hands. Her son stood beside her, face solemn, shoulders straight. The woman did not make a speech. She only offered the water to Mara. For a moment, the square held its breath. Mara looked at the canteen, then at the child. She took it from the mother, opened it, and drank. Just once. Then she handed it to the boy. "Carry it well," she said. The boy nodded as if he had been given a duty larger than water. By noon, a wagon rolled west with markers for the spring ground. Amos Vale rode in it with the deed books wrapped in oilcloth on his lap, guarding paper like it had become sacred after all the damage done by ink. Elias and Mara followed on horseback. They passed the feed store, blackened along one side but already being cleared by men who now knew why it had burned. They passed the saloon, its windows dark, Silas's name scraped from the signboard but still faint beneath the wood. Then they reached the last fence. The gate stood as it had before, plain cedar rails, iron latch, no guard, no lock. A small place for such a large cruelty. Mara stopped her horse. The wind moved across the open land beyond it, carrying sage, dust, and the hidden coolness of water somewhere under stone. Elias waited beside her, silent. He could have opened the gate. He could have made a grand gesture for the town riders behind them to remember. He did not. Mara dismounted on her own. She walked to the latch, placed her hand on the wood, and stood there long enough for every person watching to understand. Return was not the same as rescue. The first time she crossed that line, they had taken her choice. This time, She took it back. The latch lifted with a soft iron click. Mara opened the gate and stepped through from the wilderness side into Redwillow land, her boots pressing into the same dust that had swallowed the spilled water. No one cheered. Cheering would have been too easy. They only removed their hats. One by one. Elias was last. Not because he hesitated, but because he was watching her. For a moment, the richest cowboy in the territory looked like a man standing before something money could never buy. Mara turned to him. You said I was yours to protect. Elias held her gaze. I was wrong. A few people looked up, startled. Elias stepped closer, stopping with the gate still open between them. No person with your strength belongs under another person's claim. I should have said I was yours to stand beside, if you wanted me there. The wind moved the blue stone at her throat. Mara looked toward the open country, then back toward the ranch road, then at Elias. There was no crowd in her eyes now. No Silas. No fence. Only choice. She placed her hand on the gate between them. Then stand beside me, she said. Elias opened the gate wider and walked through, not ahead of her, not leading, but beside her. Together they rode to Whittaker Range as the sun lowered over the valley. At the ranch gate, Mara removed the blue stone from her neck and tied it to the top rail with a strip of clean leather. It swung there in the evening light, not hidden, not buried, not carried like a wound anymore. A marker, a memory, a promise kept late, but kept. Elias watched her tie the knot. Does that mean you are staying? Mara looked at the house, the barns, the young horse grazing near the fence, and the long road behind them. It means I know where the gate is, she said. Elias nodded. That was answer enough. As dusk settled, the wind passed through the blue stone and made it tap softly against the rail. In Redwillow, people would tell the story many ways in the years after. Some would say Elias Whittaker saved Mara Redwillow. Some would say Mara saved the town from a lie it had mistaken for law. But those who had seen her step back through the last fence knew the truer thing. She had not been given a place. She had walked into it, upright and unafraid. And everyone who once cast her out learned that justice does not always arrive with a raised voice or a smoking gun. Sometimes it comes as a woman crossing a gate in silence, and a man wise enough to walk beside her.